The quiet before the storm. The first light of dawn crept across the hills of Ashbourne, gilding the mists that hung low over the meadows. The estate, once a jewel of the English countryside, now wore its years like a weary soldier bore his scars, silently, stoically, with fading pride. Stone walls leaned with age, ivy clung to their cracks, and the great fountain in the courtyard sang only with rainwater and silence. Lady Eveline Ashbourne stood at the balcony of her chamber, the morning chill brushing against her cheeks. She had been awake long before the first bird stirred, long before the servants began to rattle about below. Sleep came rarely to her these days. There was too much to be done, and too much to fear. From her balcony, the world looked almost peaceful. The fields stretched golden beneath the rising sun, the Ashbourne woods murmured softly in the breeze, and the distant village smoke curled gently toward the heavens. Yet, beyond that quiet horizon, there were rumours of marching boots, of a war that had already swallowed other towns whole. War, the word itself felt like a curse. Eveline drew her shawl closer. Her father, Lord Edmund Ashbourne, had spoken little of it, though she caught the worry in his eyes when letters arrived. He was a man of once great means, his wealth thinned by poor harvests and worse politics. His loyalty to the crown was unquestioned, but even loyalty could not feed the hungry or mend a dying roof. And now the crown demanded more. Men, horses, supplies. It was said that General Damian Rowan himself, the King's Iron Commander, was sweeping through the southern counties, requisitioning estates and resources in preparation for the campaign across the sea. Some called him a hero, others a butcher. Eveline only knew the name as one spoken in hushed tones by candlelight. A knock broke her reverie. "Come in," she said, turning slightly. The door opened to reveal Marjorie, her maid and companion since childhood. A stout woman with kind eyes and a sharper tongue, she entered carrying a tray of tea and bread. "Up before dawn again, my lady? You'll make the sun feel lazy," Marjorie scolded lightly, setting the tray on a small table. "I couldn't sleep," Eveline murmured, sitting beside it. "The air feels different." Marjorie poured the tea, her brows knitting. "Different, aye. That's because it carries the scent of soldiers. They say a regiment passed through Hawthorne Vale just yesterday. Headed this way, perhaps." Eveline paused mid-sip. "Headed this way?" "So they say. And with them rides their general, that Rowan fellow, the one they call the Iron Wolf." "The Iron Wolf," Eveline repeated, her voice soft, almost disbelieving. "Such a name belongs in tales, not in England." Marjorie sniffed. "Tales or no, men like him don't ride for stories. They ride for war." Eveline turned toward the window again, the morning sun now bright against the dew. She thought of the villagers, the men who might be taken, the fields that might burn. Ashbourne had been spared before, tucked away in its quiet valley, but no place stayed hidden forever. A sudden gust of wind caught her hair, and with it came the faint echo of hoofbeats. By midday the sound had grown clearer, rhythmic, purposeful, like the pulse of the earth itself. The manor stirred in nervous excitement. Servants hurried to tidy rooms that hadn't seen company in months, while Lord Edmund emerged from his study, a letter clenched tightly in his hand. "Eveline," he said, his tone brisk but weary, "we're to receive guests." "Guests, father?" He nodded gravely. "The army. General Rowan rides with them. They will arrive before evening. We are to provide quarters and supplies." Eveline felt her stomach twist. "The army! Here." "I have little choice," Lord Edmund said. "They bear royal orders. We must receive them with courtesy and caution." She lowered her gaze. "And if they take what little we have left?" "Then we bow, and survive what we must," he replied quietly. "War spares no pride." His words lingered long after he left the room. By dusk, the air had changed. The peaceful hum of the countryside was replaced by the distant thunder of approaching cavalry. From her place on the steps of the manor, Evelyn watched as the first line of soldiers appeared over the ridge, red coats bright against the dimming light, banners snapping in the cold wind. And at their head rode a man unlike any she had ever seen, General Damian Rowan. He was taller than she imagined, his posture straight and unyielding. His uniform bore the marks of travel, dust, wear, the faint scent of smoke. His dark hair was tied back neatly, though strands escaped beneath his hat. And his face was carved with the kind of strength that spoke of battles fought both on and off the field. His eyes, sharp, unreadable, took in every detail of the estate as he dismounted. When they met hers, Evelyn forgot to breathe. It was not beauty that struck her. It was presence, the sort that silenced rooms and steadied storms. He removed his gloves slowly, his expression unreadable. "Lady Eveline Ashbourne," he said, his voice low, steady, and edged with command. "Your father's letter spoke of your kindness in receiving us." Evelyn curtsied, her voice quieter than she wished. "General Rowan, we are honoured to host you." "Honour is a word better suited for peace," he replied, a faint shadow crossing his features. "But I thank you all the same." Behind him, soldiers began to unload carts, their movements efficient, disciplined. The air smelled of leather, sweat, and steel. War had arrived at Ashbourne's door, and it did not knock softly. As evening settled, the manor transformed. The grand hall, long silent, filled with the murmur of officers and the clatter of boots. Maps spread across tables, candles burned low, and the scent of wax mingled with damp wool. Evelyn watched it all from the corner, unseen by most, except by him. Damian's gaze found her again, lingering longer this time, not out of curiosity, but out of study, as if she were another battlefield to be understood. When their eyes met, neither spoke, but the silence between them was louder than the chatter of men. Later that night, Evelyn would stand again at her balcony, listening to the distant roll of thunder. Yet it was not thunder that filled the night. It was drums, war drums. And beneath their echo, one truth became clear to her. The storm had come to Ashbourne, and its name was Damian Rowan. The general and the garden. The morning after the soldiers' arrival dawned grey and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to hold its breath before a storm. Ashbourne Manor, once a refuge of quiet civility, now pulsed with the restless energy of men at war. Horses filled the courtyard. Boots echoed down corridors where laughter once lived, and the scent of iron and damp wool hung in the air. Lady Evelyn moved through the halls like a ghost in her own home. The soldiers bowed as she passed, though most avoided meeting her eyes, not out of disrespect, but because her gaze carried the chill of defiance. She had spent her entire life among these walls. To see them turned into a military camp was both surreal and heartbreaking. She carried a basket of linens toward the east wing, now converted into the officers' quarters, when she nearly collided with a tall figure stepping out of her father's study. "Lady Evelyn," said General Rowan, his tone calm but commanding. She stopped instantly, the basket tightening in her hands. "General," she managed, lowering her eyes briefly before meeting his again. "I beg your pardon, I didn't see you." "I noticed," he said, though there was no edge of mockery in his voice. His gaze shifted to the basket she carried. You needn't trouble yourself with this. My men can handle domestic duties." Eveline straightened. Ashbourne's household still serves its own, even under occupation. Something flickered in his eyes, approval perhaps or surprise. "Occupation," he repeated quietly. "A harsh word, my lady. I'd prefer to think of this as cooperation." Her lips curved faintly. "A word chosen by the side with the soldiers." For a moment his composure cracked, just enough for the faintest trace of amusement to touch his mouth. "You have courage," he said softly. "Or folly. Perhaps both," she replied. He inclined his head slightly. "Then I envy you. I've been forced to live without either for far too long." Their silence was broken by Lord Edmund's voice from within the study. "General Rowan, the ledgers are ready." Rowan turned, his expression shifting back to formality. "Excuse me, Lady Evelyn." She stepped aside, and as he passed, the faint brush of air that followed him smelled of rain, leather, and something cold, something disciplined and unyielding. That evening, after the manor had quieted, Evelyn sought refuge in her garden. The soldiers rarely came this far. The southern gardens were wild, unkept, forgotten by all but her. Here the roses grew tangled with thorns, and ivy crawled over the fountain's stone rim. It was her sanctuary, the last untouched corner of her world. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky with gold and bruised violet, when she heard the crunch of gravel behind her. "I thought I might find you here," came the low voice. She turned sharply. Damien Rowan stood at the edge of the garden path, hands clasped behind his back, his greatcoat unbuttoned. He looked oddly out of place amid the wild roses, a figure of war in a place that knew only peace. "How did you know where to find me?" she asked, forcing calm. "I didn't," he said. "I followed the silence." Evelyn frowned. "Silence?" He nodded. "A house filled with soldiers is never still, except here. It's rare to find quiet in times like these." "You speak as if you miss it," she said, plucking a faded rose petal from its stem. He studied her for a moment. "I do, but quiet comes at a cost. Often it means you've buried too many voices to hear anything else." Evelyn hesitated. She hadn't expected honesty. Not from him. Not from the man whispered about as the Iron Wolf. "You speak like a man who regrets victory." "Victory," he murmured, stepping closer, "is the most overrated illusion in the world." There was no arrogance in his tone, only weariness. The kind that seeps into the bones after too many battles. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the faint scar that traced along his jaw, disappearing beneath his collar. "Tell me, Lady Evelyn," he said, "do you fear war?" Her breath caught. "Everyone fears war. Not everyone admits it. Then you don't?" He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "I fear what it makes of men, and what it takes from women." The answer disarmed her. For a long moment, neither spoke. The evening air thickened between them, heavy with things neither dared name. Eveline turned away first, her hand brushing against a rosebush. A thorn pricked her finger, and she drew in a soft gasp. Instantly, Rowan reached for her hand. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she said quickly, but he ignored her, taking her hand gently in his. His touch was warm, firm, a soldier's touch, used to command, not to care. Yet there was something careful in the way he turned her palm upward, examining the small drop of blood. "Even roses draw blood," he murmured, "especially the beautiful ones." Her heart stumbled in her chest. "You speak like a poet, General." He smiled faintly. "Only when I forget I'm a soldier." "Then perhaps you should forget more often." For the first time, she saw something shift in his expression, the faintest ghost of peace. He released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to do so. "You should go inside," he said finally. "It's getting cold." "And you?" she asked. "I'll walk the grounds," he replied. "A general sleeps lightly." Eveline nodded, though part of her didn't want to leave. She hesitated on the path, then turned back. "General Rowan." "Yes. Do you ever tire of command?" He looked up at the sky, the first stars breaking through the clouds. "Every day, but men die when their leaders rest." There was nothing more to say. She turned toward the manor, her heart unsteady, her steps uncertain. When she glanced back once more, he was still there, standing among the roses, watching the horizon as if it held the ghosts of his past. That night, Eveline dreamt of drums again. But this time, beneath the rhythm of war, she heard another sound. The soft, steady beat of a heart she could not silence. The heart of the man she feared, and could not stop thinking about. The House of Shadows. The following week brought rain, relentless, grey and unending. It beat against the windows of Ashbourne Manor, turning the gardens into rivers, and the courtyard into a mire of mud and hoofprints. The soldiers, once bright with parade precision, now carried the scent of exhaustion and damp wool. War was moving closer. It was whispered in every dripping corridor, murmured among servants, and etched into the faces of the men who gathered in the great hall to pore over maps by candlelight. Eveline heard the word front line more than once, and each time her stomach tightened with a dread she could neither name nor dismiss. Lord Edmund fell ill within days of the soldiers' arrival. His cough worsened, and the physician warned that his lungs were failing. The old man, proud as ever, refused to rest. But as he weakened, more of the manor's burdens fell upon Eveline's shoulders, the supplies, the household, the guests, and the wounded. For though General Rowan had not asked it, Eveline had insisted that a portion of the East Gallery be turned into an infirmary. It was her one defiance that the general did not contest. He came to her that morning, when the rain had softened to mist. She stood among the cots, bandaging a soldier's arm with steady hands. Her dress was stained, her hair loosely bound, a far cry from the polished daughter of a noble house. Yet there was something radiant in her composure, a quiet courage that filled the room. Rowan paused in the doorway, his gloved hands clasped behind him. He watched her work in silence for several moments before speaking. "You do not have to do this." Eveline looked up, startled. "Do what, General?" "Tend to my men." "They are not your men when they bleed," she replied simply. "They are only men." His jaw tightened, but his eyes softened. "Even so, this is not a task for Bess, you." She smiled faintly. "Forgive me, but the women of Ashbourne have never been fond of being told what is or isn't their place." A spark of amusement flickered in his expression. "I believe you." Eveline rose, wiping her hands on a cloth. "If you came to command me, General, you'll find it a wasted effort." He stepped closer, his boots silent on the stone floor. "No," he said quietly. "I came to thank you." The words caught her off guard. "To thank me?" "For giving humanity to a place that has forgotten it." Eveline held his gaze, and for a moment she saw past the iron discipline, saw the man behind the uniform, weary and haunted. The rain outside softened, as if the world itself was listening. Then, from the far end of the hall, a soldier stumbled in, soaked and breathless. "General Rowan!" he shouted. "Message from the field! Urgent!" Rowan turned sharply. "Speak." The man saluted, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Enemy scouts were sighted near the valley road, just beyond Ashbourne's woods. Eveline's heart stilled. So close?" "Yes, my lady," the soldier replied grimly. "If they push farther, they could reach the estate by nightfall." Rowan's eyes darkened. "Double the watch at the gate, and send word to Captain Hale. I want the men ready to move before dawn." The soldier saluted again and vanished down the corridor. Evelyn spoke quietly. "They mean to attack?" "Scouts don't attack," he said. "They watch, they count, they prepare, which means war is coming," she finished for him. He looked at her, and she saw something flicker across his face, not fear but a grim acceptance. "War never comes," he said softly. "It simply arrives where it was always headed." That night, the manor slept uneasily. Even the rain seemed to hesitate, falling softer, as if unwilling to wake the wounded men below. Eveline lay awake, the candlelight dancing against the ceiling, her thoughts restless and tangled. A soft knock came at her door. She rose, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. When she opened it, she found General Rowan standing in the corridor, shadows clinging to him like a second cloak. "Forgive me for disturbing you," he said. "Your father asked for you." Her heart leapt. "Is he alive?" Rowan said quickly, "but weak. He wishes to speak with you before he rests." Eveline followed him down the hall. Her father's chamber smelled faintly of smoke and medicine. Lord Edmund lay propped against pillows, his face pale, his breath shallow. Yet when he saw her, a flicker of strength returned to his eyes. "Eveline," he whispered, "you must listen." "Father, you should rest." "No," he rasped, his voice a ghost of its former command. "If war reaches Ashbourne, you must trust General Rowan. Promise me." Eveline hesitated, glancing toward the man who stood silent at the bedside. His gaze was steady, unreadable. "Father, promise me," he said again. She swallowed hard. "I promise." Lord Edmund nodded faintly, his hand falling back to the coverlet. His breathing slowed, but did not stop. Rowan stepped forward, adjusting the blanket with a gentleness that startled her. "He's strong," Rowan murmured. "He'll hold on." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time she saw not a general, but a man who carried the weight of too many lives on his shoulders. "Do you always speak comfort to others?" she asked softly, "or only to those who are afraid?" His eyes met hers. "I speak truth. Fear doesn't vanish when ignored. It quiets when shared." For a moment, neither moved. The silence between them was fragile, suspended. Then, without a word, he turned and left the room. Evelyn stood there long after he was gone, her father's faint breaths the only sound in the chamber. When she looked out the window, lightning flashed across the horizon, brief, sharp, and distant, but not distant enough. The next morning came with chaos. The scouts had been right. By dawn, messengers arrived. The enemy had crossed the valley. The officers moved swiftly through the halls, gathering weapons, maps, orders. The manor transformed once more, this time into a fortress. Eveline found Rowan in the great hall, his voice steady as he issued commands. "Barricade the eastern gate. Move the wounded to the cellar. No one leaves the grounds without my word." He caught sight of her and paused. "Lady Evelyn," he said, lowering his tone, "you should stay with your father. The soldiers will hold the perimeter." "I will stay where I am needed," she replied firmly. "If the wounded are moved, I'll see to them." He exhaled through his nose, not in anger, but in reluctant admiration. "You never yield, do you?" "Would you respect me if I did?" "No," he said quietly, "I would not." Their eyes met, a moment of unspoken understanding amid the chaos. And in that instant, she realized something she could not deny. Damien Rowan was not only the war that had come to her doorstep, he was also the man standing between her world and ruin. That evening, as soldiers prepared the manor for defence, Eveline wandered to the west corridor, where the light from the storm flickered through tall windows. There, she noticed something strange, a door slightly ajar. It led to the old servant passageways beneath the house, tunnels long forgotten, built generations ago. But now, the faint glimmer of lantern light flickered within. She hesitated and stepped closer. From within she heard voices. One of them she recognized. It belonged to a soldier, one of Rowan's men. The other was a stranger's, low, foreign, dangerous. "We have what we came for," the stranger said. "Tonight, when the watch changes, open the gate." Eveline froze. A spy. "The farm," soldier hissed back. "And the general. The general won't live to see morning," the stranger interrupted. Eveline's heart pounded. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She stumbled backward, too quickly. A loose board creaked beneath her foot. The lantern light swung towards the door. "Who's there?" Eveline turned and ran. By the time she reached the hall, her pulse was hammering. She didn't think. She went straight for the great hall, bursting through the doors. "General Rowan!" she cried. He was at the map table, surrounded by officers. He turned sharply at her voice. "What is it?" "There's a traitor among your men," she said breathlessly. "In the lower corridors. I heard them plotting." The officers exchanged glances, uncertain. Rowan's gaze hardened. "Who did you hear?" "I didn't see, but one of them wore your uniform. The other spoke with a foreign accent." For a moment, the air itself seemed to still. Then Rowan spoke, his voice quiet but lethal. "Captain Hale, lock down the lower hall. Find them, now." The men scattered. Eveline stood trembling, her breath uneven. Rowan crossed the space between them in 2 strides, gripping her arms just above the elbows. "You went down there alone?" he said, his voice low with something that was not anger, but fear. "You could have been killed." "I couldn't just stay silent," she whispered. "You needed to know." His grip softened, his eyes burning into hers. "You're braver than any soldier I've known." Her breath caught, her pulse quickening beneath his touch. "And you," she said softly, "are not as unfeeling as you pretend to be." Something passed between them, fierce, fragile, forbidden. Then, from the corridor beyond, came the echo of shouting, the clash of steel. Rowan released her. "Stay here," he ordered. And before she could protest, he was gone, into the shadows, into the storm. That night Ashbourne Manor stood divided between 2 worlds, one of fire and loyalty, the other of treachery and fear. And in the quiet heart of it all, Lady Eveline realized that war was not just fought with weapons, it was fought with hearts. And hers was already losing. Letters from the front. Eveline woke to the deep rolling thunder of cannon fire echoing across the valley. For a moment, she thought it was another storm, until she saw the orange flicker through the mist beyond the hills, not lightning, but fire. War had arrived. From the balcony, she could see soldiers moving like ants across the fields, red coats glinting through the haze. Horses screamed. Smoke crawled upward, swallowing the dawn. The once quiet meadows of Ashbourne were now a battlefield, and at its centre rode Damien Rowan. He moved like a man born for chaos, calm amid the storm, commanding with the precision of instinct. From her distant view, she could see him lifting his sword, signalling formations, his voice carrying above the wind. Every gesture, every order was life or death. And yet there was something almost tragic in his composure, the weight of knowing that each victory carved another scar into his soul. The manor trembled with the sound of artillery. Eveline gathered the wounded in the cellar, her hands slick with blood that wasn't hers. She tore linen into bandages, poured what medicine remained, and whispered prayers she wasn't sure reached heaven anymore. Hours passed. The ground shook again and again. By nightfall, silence finally fell. Not the silence of peace, but the suffocating stillness after destruction. When the doors opened and the first survivors stumbled in, she ran to the courtyard. "General Rowan!" she called. But it wasn't him who entered. Only his captain, Hale, his face grey with exhaustion. "The general still holds the line," he said. "He's ordered a retreat to the northern ridge by morning. The wounded stay here. The manor will serve as their stronghold." Eveline's throat tightened. "He's still out there?" Hale nodded. "He'll return if he lives through the night." He didn't return that night, nor the next. The third day dawned bleak and cold, and still there was no word. Eveline refused to believe he was gone. Each knock on the door made her heart leap, only to shatter again when it was a messenger with more wounded, more bodies, more loss. Then, on the fourth night, a single courier arrived through the rain, his horse lathered and trembling. He carried a sealed letter, its paper torn and smudged with dirt. "To Lady Eveline Ashbourne," he said hoarsely, pressing it into her hands, "from General Rowan." Her fingers shook as she broke the seal. The handwriting inside was sharp, deliberate, his. "If this reaches you, it means I still breathe, though for how long I cannot say. We hold the ridge, but barely. The enemy presses harder than we thought, and each night brings fewer men to count. Yet I have seen courage among them that humbles me, courage like yours. I cannot write of strategy or hope, only of truth. The world is fire, and yet when I think of Ashbourne, of your voice among the roses, your defiance, your light, I find I still remember what peace feels like. If I fall, know this. You have already saved more of me than war ever destroyed. D. Rowan." Her tears fell silently onto the page. She pressed the letter to her heart, whispering a prayer into the candle flame. "Come back," she breathed. "Please, come back." Weeks passed. The war dragged on beyond the hills, far enough that its thunder became rumour again. Ashbourne Manor lived half alive, part infirmary, part tomb. Eveline wrote to him each night, though she never knew if her letters reached him. Her words became confessions she could never have spoken aloud. "My dear General, I see your men heal and march again, but each day your absence grows heavier. The roses in the garden have withered. I cannot bring myself to tend them. The air carries your silence like a wound I cannot close. If courage is what you admire, then I will be brave enough to say it. You have my heart, though you never asked for it. And if you never return, you will still have it all the same." Sometimes she imagined him reading her words by a campfire, the flame catching in his eyes, his mouth curving faintly at her stubbornness. Other nights, she feared he was already gone. Then, one late afternoon, as she tended to the wounded by the window, a shout rose from the courtyard. "Riders! From the front!" She dropped the bandage in her hands and ran. Rain pelted the stone steps as she burst outside. A column of horses entered the gate, mud splattering their flanks. And at their head, bloodied, pale but alive, rode General Damien Rowan. "Damien!" The name slipped from her lips before she could stop it. He dismounted stiffly, his uniform torn, his arm bound in a sling. For a heartbeat he didn't see her. Then his eyes lifted, and everything else vanished. "Lady Eveline," he said hoarsely, "you shouldn't be out in the rain." "You shouldn't be bleeding," she shot back, her voice trembling. He almost smiled. "Fair point." When he swayed, she reached him before anyone else could. Her hand caught his arm, steadying him. "Come inside." He didn't protest. In the warmth of the manor's great hall, she helped him to the fire. The room was empty except for the sound of rain and the soft hiss of the hearth. She unfastened the clasp of his cloak. It was soaked and heavy, and knelt to remove his gloves, her hands brushing his. He winced as she examined the gash along his shoulder. "A musket ball?" she asked. "Just a graze," he said, voice low. "I've had worse. Does it hurt?" "Only when I breathe." "Then you must stop breathing, General," she murmured, a faint smile trembling through her fear. His eyes caught hers, weary, dark, unguarded. "If I did, I suspect you'd bring me back by sheer will." She flushed, tearing a strip of linen to bind his wound. "I might." He watched her work in silence. The firelight danced across her face, catching in her lashes, glinting on the tear she hadn't noticed had fallen. "You read my letter?" he asked at last. She nodded. "Every night. And you wrote back." Her hands froze. "You received them?" He shook his head slowly. "No, but I knew you would write." Their eyes met again, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. No gunfire, no war, only the sound of the rain and the fragile rhythm of two hearts finding each other in the wreckage. "Eveline," he said softly, her name a confession in itself. "I have no right to ask this, but I must. When this war ends—" "If it ends," she whispered. "When?" he said firmly. "When it ends, will you leave this place, this ruin that's become a battlefield?" She looked at the flickering firelight. "This is my home. It's a graveyard," he said quietly. "You deserve more than ashes." She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "And where would I go?" He hesitated, then answered, "Wherever I go." The words hung between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Duty, desire, the impossibility of both. Before she could reply, a knock shattered the moment. Captain Hale entered, soaked and grim. "General, dispatches from London. You're ordered north at once. Reinforcements gather near Derby." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Tonight?" Hale nodded. "The carriage waits." Eveline's heart fell. So soon? He rose slowly, his wound reopening, but he ignored it. "The king commands, my lady, and I obey." She wanted to speak, to beg him to stay, but no words came, only silence. He took her hand suddenly, his fingers rough and warm. "Keep Ashbourne safe," he said, "and keep my letters." She blinked back tears. "Will you write again?" He gave her a faint, sorrowful smile. "If the world allows it." Then, before she could stop him, he bent, just enough that his lips brushed the back of her hand. It wasn't a soldier's courtesy, it was a promise. And then he was gone, out into the night, into the rain, into the war that would not end. 3 months later. Winter came early. Snow covered the gardens like a shroud, and the manor slept beneath its weight. Eveline lived among ghosts now. Her father's illness had worsened. Many of the soldiers were gone. The laughter that once filled these halls had long since faded. Only the letters remained, each one worn thin from reading, folded carefully in her drawer. Some nights she traced the ink with her fingertip, as if touching the words could summon him home. Then, one bitter morning, a messenger arrived again, but this time his eyes were lowered. He handed her a sealed envelope. It bore the royal crest and Rowan's handwriting. "To Lady Eveline Ashbourne, by order of His Majesty, I am bound to inform you that General Damien Rowan fell in the defence of Derby on the 2nd of December. His body was not recovered. His service is recorded with highest honour. Colonel James Hale." The world tilted. She didn't cry, not at first. She simply stood there, staring at the page, at the ink that blurred beneath her trembling hands. The fire crackled faintly beside her, and for the first time in months she felt truly, utterly alone. She folded the letter carefully, pressed it to her lips, and whispered, "You promised me peace, Damien, and gave me war instead." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, endless, and silent. The siege within snow blanketed the valley for weeks. The world outside Ashbourne Manor lay hushed beneath white silence, the kind that comes after too much death. Eveline moved like a ghost through her own halls. The manor had become an echo of its former self. Corridors of flickering candles, whispers of wind slipping through cracks, and the haunting rhythm of her footsteps on cold stone floors. Each night she reread the final letter, the one that had declared Damien Rowan dead. Each night the words cut deeper, because something inside her refused to believe them. He was too stubborn to die quietly, too fierce, too alive. But denial, she knew, was a dangerous kind of hope. By late January, the estate was nearly out of supplies. Most of the soldiers had been reassigned north. Only a handful remained, those too wounded or too loyal to leave her alone. Among them was Captain Hale, now limping from an old injury, and a quiet young orderly named Samuel, who shadowed Eveline wherever she went. On the morning of the 12th, Hale came to her study, his uniform heavy with frost. "Lady Eveline," he said, voice low, "the villages east of here have fallen silent. We think the enemy may be moving south again." Her pen stilled over the paper. "So soon? I thought the war was shifting north." "It was." Hale hesitated. "But there are rumors. Deserters, raiders, men with no allegiance left to crown or country. They're looting estates like this one." She met his eyes. "And you think they'll come here?" "I know they will." Eveline rose slowly, her face pale but resolute. "Then we prepare." For the first time since Damien's departure, the manor stirred with purpose. Windows were shuttered, the gates reinforced, fires kept burning to ward off the bitter cold. Eveline moved among them, issuing orders with quiet authority. There was no trembling now, no trace of the sheltered lady she once was. Loss had hardened her. Grief had turned to resolve. At night, when the wind howled like wolves across the fields, she walked the darkened halls alone, clutching a lantern, the only light left against the storm. And every time she passed the great doors, she paused, half expecting to see a tall figure emerge from the snow, his cloak torn, his voice saying, "You see, my lady, I couldn't die without permission." But he never came. Then, one night, the 24th of January, the knock came. A single deliberate knock that echoed through the silence. Hale was the first to draw his pistol. Eveline, heart-hammering, motioned him back and approached the door. "Who goes there?" Hale barked. A pause, then a voice, hoarse and half-broken through the wind. "Open, please!" Something in that tone, that faint rasp, like someone speaking through pain, made her blood turn to ice. She knew that voice. Before Hale could stop her, she unlatched the heavy doors. The snow howled inward, and with it stumbled a man half-collapsed, covered in mud, blood, and frost. His coat was torn, his face shadowed with weeks of hardship. "God above!" Hale breathed, lowering his weapon. "General Rowan!" He fell to his knees, gasping. Eveline caught him before he hit the floor. "Damien!" she whispered, his name trembling out like a prayer she'd forgotten she knew how to say. "It's you! You're alive!" His eyes lifted to hers, glazed with exhaustion. "Barely! Get him to the fire!" Hale ordered. "Now!" They carried him inside, stripped the frozen cloak from his shoulders, and wrapped him in blankets. The warmth of the hearth touched his skin, revealing the full ruin of him. The bruises, the scars, the hollow hunger that spoke of captivity. He had been through hell. Hours passed before he could even speak. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, raw. "They took me at Derby," he said. "Ambushed the line before dawn. I was wounded, thought dead. A local farmer dragged me from the field, hid me. I've been moving ever since." Eveline's hand trembled on his arm. "Why didn't you send word?" "I couldn't. They would have followed the trail here." "And now?" she whispered. "Now." He exhaled. "Now they know where I am." By morning, the threat was no longer rumor. Smoke rose from the distant woods, black columns twisting against the pale sky. Hale's scouts returned with grim faces. "A company of marauders, 40 men, maybe more. They're coming fast." Eveline turned to Damien. He sat by the window, pale but steady. "Can you fight?" she asked. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "My lady, I can barely stand." "Then you command. We'll fight for you." Her words hit him harder than any wound. "Eveline, no, this is my home," she said firmly, "and yours, if you wish it." He looked at her, really looked, and saw not the fragile daughter of nobility he'd met months ago, but a woman shaped by fire. Strong, unbreakable. "Very well," he said at last. "Then we hold Ashbourne together." The siege began at dusk. They came through the trees like shadows. Rough men in torn uniforms carrying torches and muskets. The manor's defenders, barely 15 in number, took positions at the windows and barricades. Eveline moved among them, loading muskets, carrying powder. Fearless despite the bullets that shattered the walls around her. Damien, weakened but resolute, directed every movement from the grand stair, his voice steady, sharp, commanding. "Hold the left flank. Keep the fire steady. Samuel, the lanterns now." Each order was life-preserved for another heartbeat. Then the gates burst open. The enemy poured through. Hale fired the first shot. Samuel went down in a cry. Chaos erupted. Smoke, screams, the acrid scent of gunpowder filling the air. Through it all, Eveline saw Damien stumble, blood seeping through his bandage. "Damien!" she screamed. He caught her gaze through the haze. "Get back!" But she didn't listen. She ran to him just as the intruder lunged from the shadows, a scarred man with a saber raised high. She didn't think. She seized the fallen musket, fired, and the man fell. The recoil sent her sprawling. Damien caught her, half collapsing himself, both of them sinking to the floor as the last gunfire faded into silence. When the smoke cleared, the courtyard was littered with the fallen. The survivors, Hale among them, stood dazed but alive. The siege had ended. Ashbourne still stood. Later, when the fires were out and the snow began to fall again, Eveline found Damien sitting in the ruins of the great hall. The light of the dying flames painted him in bronze and shadow. "You should rest," she said softly. "I can't," he murmured. "Not while I keep seeing their faces." She stepped closer. "You saved us." He shook his head. "No, you did." Their eyes met, exhaustion and love, grief and relief colliding in the stillness. She reached out, touching his scarred cheek. "You said once that I was your peace," she whispered, "but I think perhaps you were my war, and I no longer fear it." His lips curved faintly. "Then what do you crave now?" Her hand slid to his chest, feeling the slow, fragile beat of his heart. "Peace," she said, "but only if you're in it." He took her hand, pressing it to his heart. "Then let us end this war together." And for the first time since the world began burning, he pulled her into his arms, not as a soldier claiming victory, but as a man finding home. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft, endless, forgiving. Inside, two souls who had been torn apart by battle found something that looked, at last, like peace. The war she feared. Ashbourne Manor was quiet again, but not with peace. It was the silence of exhaustion, of bodies buried and promises whispered into smoke. Snow lay heavy across the courtyard, covering the blood like a shroud. Eveline stood by the window of her father's study, the same one she had looked through months ago when the first cannons had sounded in the valley. How far they had come since then! How much she had lost and gained! Damien stood behind her, his arms still bandaged, his face drawn with pain. The light caught on the line of his jaw, on the haunted darkness in his eyes. "You shouldn't be on your feet," she said softly without turning. "I've spent too long lying down," he answered. "Besides, sleep doesn't come easily anymore." She looked at him then. "Because of the siege." He hesitated. "Because of what's coming." They sat together by the fire as the last of the soldiers rode out to deliver messages of survival. Hale lingered longest, saluting before leaving the room. When the doors closed, the two were alone. "Damien," Eveline began, "you said something last night, that they knew where you were. What did you mean by that?" He didn't answer immediately. He reached for a map folded on the table, spreading it open across the desk. Red ink circled the northern territories, where the fighting had been fiercest. "This war," he said slowly, "wasn't meant to last. It was meant to break something, not the enemy, but us. Our command, our loyalty, our sense of right and wrong. I don't understand." He lifted his gaze to hers. "Because you weren't meant to. I wasn't either, but the truth has a way of surfacing." He pulled a small packet from his coat, crumpled, sealed with a wax emblem she didn't recognize. Inside were letters, stamped with the royal seal. She unfolded one and froze. Her father's name was written at the bottom, Lord Cedric Ashbourne. "Your father," Damien said quietly, "was not merely an observer of this war. He helped finance it." She looked up sharply. "That's not possible." "It is. These documents prove it. He supplied intelligence and gold to both sides. He kept the conflict burning so that neither army would have strength enough to challenge his trade routes." Eveline's breath caught. No, he was loyal to the crown. He was loyal to himself. She shook her head, backing away as if the words themselves burned. "You're lying. I wish I were," Damien said softly. "I wanted to believe in him, in you, but when I was captured at Derby, I saw his seal on orders sent to the enemy's general. He sold the ridge we defended. He sold us." Her hand flew to her mouth. "You mean he betrayed us all?" The truth cracked the world open. Eveline sank into the chair by the hearth, her fingers trembling. "You think he knew you'd find out?" Damien nodded. "He feared I would survive. That's why my death notice was sent so quickly. It was meant to close the matter before questions could rise." Tears welled in her eyes. "And you came back anyway." "I came back for you," he said, "but I also came for the truth." She looked at him, really looked, and saw the torment behind his calm. "What will you do now?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened. "If I follow duty, I deliver these letters to London. Your father will hang for treason." She rose, voice shaking. "He's dying already, Damien. Please, let him face God, not a gallows." His eyes softened, but only slightly. "He took hundreds of lives to protect his wealth. How many sons and fathers will never come home because of him?" Her voice broke. "And yet you love me." He closed the distance between them in 2 steps. "That's what makes this war unbearable." That night, the manor was restless. The snow had turned to freezing rain, drumming against the windows like ghosts at the glass. Eveline sat by her father's bedside, watching the slow, laboured rise of his chest. "Father," she whispered, "what did you do?" His eyes fluttered open, pale, clouded. "You shouldn't ask, child." "I must," he coughed, his breath rattling. "You wouldn't understand. We're all slaves to survival. The crown would have ruined us if I hadn't bargained. With our enemies," she choked, "with whoever would listen." Her tears fell silently onto his blanket. "You destroyed everything." "I kept us alive." "Alive?" she whispered. "You've buried us in shame." He turned his head weakly toward the window, where the rain streaked down like tears. "You sound like your mother," he murmured, "always too righteous for this world." When he slipped back into silence, Eveline stood, trembling with rage and grief. In the doorway stood Damien. He had heard everything. Their eyes met across the candlelit room. She wanted to run to him, and wanted to strike him in the same breath. He stepped forward slowly. "You see now," he said softly, "there is no innocence in war." "Nor in love," she whispered. The storm outside grew louder. In the great hall, Damien stood alone before the fire, the sealed letters spread across the table. He stared at them for a long time, as if they might burn holes into his soul. When Eveline entered, her cloak drawn tight, his hand was already on the flame. "What are you doing?" she cried. He looked up at her. "Ending it." He dropped the letters into the fire. The wax seals curled, the ink turned to smoke. Her father's sins vanished in a whisper of ash. She stepped closer, heart pounding. "You'll be condemned for this." "So be it," he said. "I've killed enough men to last a lifetime. I won't add your name to that list." She stared at him, and suddenly saw the truth she had missed all along. He wasn't just a soldier. He was a man who had spent his life fighting wars he never wanted, losing pieces of himself each time. "Damien," she whispered, voice breaking, "why do you keep saving me?" He gave a small, pained smile. "Because saving you is the only thing that ever made me feel human." The storm roared outside, and lightning flashed through the windows, a single burst of light across his face, across hers. And in that moment, they moved toward each other, not out of passion, but out of everything that had been held back, denied, buried under duty and pain. He took her in his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both surrender and salvation. When they finally parted, she whispered against his skin, "You were the war I feared." He rested his forehead against hers, "And the peace you craved." At dawn, the storm broke. The world outside glowed pale and clean again, as if the night had washed it free. Damien stood in the courtyard, his cloak whipping in the cold wind. Eveline joined him, her eyes clear despite the sleepless night. "What now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "I go to London, to end what's left of this war, and to clear your family's name as best I can." She swallowed hard. "And when that's done—" He looked at her, his voice low. "Then I return, if you'll still have me." She reached out, touching his cheek. "I'll wait, even if the world burns again." He took her hand and pressed it to his lips, once, softly, and then turned away, walking into the mist that rose from the thawing snow. Eveline watched until he vanished beyond the hills, her heart a battlefield between fear and hope. Because this time she knew, he wasn't just fighting for a kingdom, he was fighting his way back to her. The peace she craved spring came slowly that year. The frost clung stubbornly to the edges of the valley, as if even the earth itself feared to believe that war had ended. Ashbourne Manor stood quiet once more, scarred but alive. The gardens, once trampled by boots and cannon wheels, were beginning to bloom again. Roses pushed through the thawed soil, pale and fragile, yet defiant, like the woman who tended them. Eveline Ashbourne knelt in the morning light, her gloved hands stained with earth. She had dismissed most of the servants months ago, preferring the solitude. The war had stripped away her old life, and with it all illusions of gentility. Every sound, every scent, every beam of sunlight carried the weight of waiting. It had been 4 months since Damien Rowan rode into the mist. No letters, no word, only silence. At first she told herself he was safe, that he had reached London, that he would return once the dust of politics and betrayal had settled. But as the weeks turned to months, hope became both her comfort and her torment. One morning, a carriage arrived from the capital. The crest on its door bore the royal insignia. Eveline stood frozen as the messenger dismounted, bowing with solemn gravity. "Lady Ashbourne," he said, handing her a sealed parchment, "by order of His Majesty." Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. "To Lady Eveline Ashbourne, it is with gratitude and respect that the Crown acknowledges the service of General Damien Rowan, whose testimony prevented civil charges against your late father and exposed the corruption within the War Council. The General has since been relieved of command and granted leave to retire from service. His present whereabouts are unknown. Office of the Prime Minister, London." Her breath caught. "Unknown?" "Yes, my lady," the messenger said gently. "He left London a fortnight ago. No destination recorded." The parchment slipped from her fingers, unknown. That word carried too many ghosts. Days passed, then weeks. Eveline tried to move forward, to mend, to breathe, to live. She opened the library again, restored the portraits damaged by fire, even began writing to the families of soldiers who had fallen at Ashbourne. But each sunset she would find herself at the balcony, looking westward toward the hills, the same horizon he had vanished into. Sometimes she thought she saw movement in the mist. A shadow, a horse, a trick of the light. And then one evening, when the sky burned gold against the fading snow, she heard hoofs. First, she thought she imagined it, the echo of a memory. But the sound grew louder, clearer. Then came the shape of a rider emerging from the dusk, broad-shouldered, cloaked in grey, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Her heart stopped. He dismounted slowly, walking through the garden gate. The sunlight caught his profile, and in that instant she knew. Damien Rowan had come home. She ran to him before reason could intervene, skirts catching on the path, breath breaking into a sob. He met her halfway, catching her as if afraid she might vanish. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply held each other as the wind carried the scent of spring around them. "You took your time," she whispered against his shoulder. He gave a soft, hoarse laugh. "I tried to make peace with the world first." "And did you?" He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "Not until now." Inside, the fire burned low. He looked thinner, older perhaps, but there was a calm in him that hadn't been there before, the quiet strength of a man who had laid his ghosts to rest. "I gave my resignation," he said. "The Crown accepted. I'm no longer a general." Eveline's lips curved faintly. "Then what are you now?" He smiled. "A man without orders, and without a home." She stepped closer. "Ashbourne still stands." He hesitated. "You'd have me here, after everything your father, after everything you did," she interrupted softly. "You spared him. You saved us. You've earned more than forgiveness, Damien. You've earned rest." He looked down. voice low. "And you? Have you forgiven me for what I was, for the war I brought to your door?" Her gaze didn't waver. "You weren't the war. You were the reason I survived it." They sat together by the window as the last light of day faded into dusk. Outside, the roses swayed in the wind, fragile yet unbroken. "I keep thinking about the first night you came here," she said quietly. "How you stood in this room like a storm I didn't know how to weather." He smiled faintly. "And yet you did." "I think," she murmured, "I always feared peace more than war, because peace means you have to live with everything you've lost." He reached for her hand, rough fingers brushing her wrist. "Then let's make a peace worth living for." She looked up at him, tears glinting in the candlelight. "What does that look like?" He tilted his head. "I don't know yet, but I thought we might find out together." That night, the manor no longer felt haunted. The halls, once echoing with absence, now carried warmth again, laughter, conversation, life. Later, when the world outside had fallen quiet, they stood on the balcony beneath a sky scattered with stars. The moonlight painted everything silver, her hair, his scars, the ruins of their world reborn. Damien took her hands in his. "I once thought love was a luxury soldiers couldn't afford," he said. "Now I think it's the only thing that keeps us human." Eveline smiled through tears. "You were the war I feared," she whispered again. "And the peace you craved," he finished softly. She rose onto her toes, kissed him, slow, unhurried, the way time itself seemed to pause around them. The world, for the first time, was still. Months later, the valley was green again. Travellers who passed through the countryside spoke of a restored estate, and a lady who walked its gardens with a man at her side, a former general who had traded command for quiet mornings and the company of roses. They said she laughed often now, though sometimes her eyes carried the memory of storms long past. And when asked about the man beside her, she would only smile and say, "He was the war I feared, and the peace I never thought I'd deserve." And so it was. Not a fairy tale ending, but a real one, built from ashes, bound by love and blessed by the silence of peace.